Welcome, everybody. Welcome to the Chax Chat podcast. My name is Chad Chilius. I'm an Adobe certified instructor and one of the accessibility wizards here at Chax Training and Consulting.
And my name is Dax Castro. I am a senior trainer here at Chax Training Consulting, and Chad and I are both certified as accessible document specialists. And if you'd like your certification, head on over to accessibilityassociation.org/certifications and learn more about the ADS or WAS, wherever you live. On whichever side of the coin you are, there is a certification for you. So, and by the way, all of our courses, anything you take from us, whether it's at Adobe Max or one of our drop-in classes on our website, accessibilityunraveled.com, or wherever you might find us, our classes qualify for continuing accessibility education credits, CAEC, CAKES. And so you get 1 credit for every hour of class you take. So if it's a 90-minute class, you get an hour and a half. If it's a 3-hour class, you get 3 credits. So yeah, it's all good. So take advantage of that for sure.
Yeah, a lot of people struggle with like how to accumulate those cake credits, right? And
keep track. That's all I can say is keep track.
For sure, keep track. But this is a great way to, get them added and included as your requirements. So all good stuff.
Yeah. Well, I want to start off today's podcast, Chad, by a great new announcement. This is actually from one of our Facebook members in our PDF Accessibility Facebook group, Michael Hanscombe. He wrote in a post that he found out that Google Docs is now starting to export PDFs with tags. Yeah. Isn't that great?
I know. You sent that to me, Dax, and I'm like, I was like, I don't know if you ever saw that guy on Instagram. He always goes, "What? No way," because he doesn't believe what they're saying. And I kind of said the same thing. I'm like, "What? No way. Google Docs doesn't add tags." And I opened one up and I saved a PDF and I'm like, by gum, there's tags there.
Yeah, in fact, he wrote an article called Google Docs Adds PDF Accessibility Tags. And his blog here is called Eclecticism, ECLECTICISM. Enthusiastically and wow. Can you make this even more complicated? You do it, Chad.
I can't. It's called Eclecticism, Enthusiastically Ambiverted Hope Punk. Right?
Holy cow.
Whatever all that is, right?
Yeah.
But it's a really good article that he did. He kind of talks about like how Google Docs for forever has not output tags when you export to the PDF format. And then he did some testings and he showed some findings and is really, really nice short article. So we can include this in the show notes and everybody can check it out if they want to.
Well, Chad, you and I did a little bit of our testing of our own and we found out that lists are interesting because as a single level list, it comes out just as good as Word, which is LLI, right? It's just the L and LI, everything gets stuffed in the LI. But that if there's a sub list, it creates the secondary L, but it doesn't put it in the L body where it's supposed to, right? Talk more about that.
Well, it creates the L and the L body, right? So it does add like you were saying with just a basic list. All the content is just in an LI, right? There's no sub tags within that LI. But then when you have sub lists, right? So if when you have like a list and then 2 sub items within that list, it does add the L body, but it doesn't put the L tag for the sub items in that L body, which is required for PDF UA.
Well, and the reason it's important, right, is because if the L is inside the L body, that cues NVDA and JAWS to say list level 2 or list level 3 or whatever it is. And so definitely important, because as you're hearing those sublists, you want to remember what level you're at and where you are. I mean, that's definitely a thing. So
Absolutely. And well, and this is a great example, Dax. I mean, you and I preach every day, test with a screen reader, right? And so like the minute you and I saw that tag structure,
yeah,
you and I both dove into NVDA and we're like reading through it and we're like, oh, wait a minute, this isn't
yeah,
reading right,
yeah.
So yeah, that was an interesting discovery.
Well, for those listening, tell them what the correct structure should be.
So full picture, right? So you have an L tag, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then every first level list item will be an LI within that list tag.
Right.
Right. So you've got list tag and then list item tags within there. Right. And then within an individual list item, if we're going to get totally proper, the the bullet or the number or whatever character you're using for your bullet will be in a label tag.
Right.
And then the content of the item, right, basically the text of the bullet, will be in an L body tag or a list item body tag. And so that's how normally those elements should be structured, right? And then of course, when you have a sub list, right? So, you've got your first level bullet, and then underneath that bullet, you've got two indented bullets, right? So they're
Mm-hmm.
children of that main bullet. Those two items are going to be in their own list tag.
Right.
But then it should be properly nested inside of that L body tag
Correct.
of the primary list item. Yeah.
Well, and what we know is that either way, the screen reader will still read it. NVDA and JAWS will still read list, and they'll read list 5 items or list 3 items. But what it misses is what level it's in. So they won't hear list level 1, list level 2. And then when you're out of list level 1, it'll say list level 2, going back and forth between the two levels. And that's the most important part of a multi-level list, is keeping track of where you are inside that list. I mean, that's definitely a key thing, right?
It absolutely is. And in my opinion, Dax, it's also, I always encourage people to really think about how you're structuring your content, right? Because, I've seen some documents where it's like bullets and then sub bullets and then sub bullets and then maybe even sub bullets, right? And man, oh day, like when you're reading that with a screen reader, now again, I'm probably not the best use case because I'm not a native screen reader user. I use a screen reader for testing, but I don't use it to consume content on a regular basis. So for me, when I'm reading all those nested bullets, I kind of get lost, right? I lose track of where I am in that structure.
Right.
And I think somebody who's used to listening to it is probably going to be much better than I am at that. But even still, I encourage people, try to simplify your content, right? Don't create sub items of sub items of sub items. I mean, it just really makes for a difficult user experience.
Well, I try to say, I tell myself, or I tell the people that I teach, that if you have to go more than 3 levels deep, you probably could use a heading somewhere. Somewhere in there, you could have probably broken out or added a heading. Because remember, anchors, those headings are anchor structure. And if you bury me 7 levels deep, or honestly 4 levels deep inside a list, because I have seen those, I have no way to get out of that list other than press H or L to move to the next list. And if you give me a heading, I can leapfrog over enough content to make to be useful, then that's a really great place from a user standpoint. Because imagine you're 4 levels deep and there's 6 pages worth of that content. When you press H to get out of the list, because you're like, look, get me out of here.
Yeah.
You're going to be skipping over 4 or 5 pages of content. Now, the screen reader user would likely hear the page number they're on. So if they were on page 3, they're going to hear page 7, heading level 2, and then whatever, and go, oh, I just skipped over 3 pages. And then they've got to arrow backward or shift L, all sorts of really bad user experiences to try to understand the content. Structure is so key when it comes to organizing the way your document is, not only for people who use a screen reader, but as a person with ADHD, give it to me in small, labeled chunks that I can understand. It just makes it so much easier to digest.
100% Dax. And when we talk about, accessibility in general, I mean, accessibility reaches so many various groups of people, right? But I also think about the people who have cognitive impairments, which is a very difficult group of, impairment to put on paper, right? You know what I mean? Because cognitive impairments affect so many people in so many different ways. And so, but just try to think about like how difficult it is when you have to kind of like memorize your location in the content. I mean, it just makes for a very, very difficult experience. But I like your idea, Dax, of, maybe you say, okay, instead of me having, all of these primary level bullets, make them a heading.
Yeah.
And what that's fundamentally going to do is it's going to group your content into a bunch of smaller lists.
Yep.
And I think it's just going to make it a lot easier. And that way you could kind of stay a little more focused too.
Yeah.
Because you're under one item. Okay, these are the bullets within that item. Okay, now let's go to the next item, right? And so you said H key, that'll take you to the next one. Okay, let's read that one. And I think it's just a much, much better experience for everybody. I'll even say, even as a sighted user.
Yeah.
Like when I read a document and it's just like bullet upon bullet upon bullet, I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm tired already. You know what I mean? Like it just seems like a lot of work, where if you group it into headings, it's a lot more manageable for me. Yeah.
Digestible for sure. Yeah. You mentioned something about cognitive impairment, right? Cognitive disability. I was watching a podcast or watching a YouTube video the other day, and the person, I don't remember her name, but she brought up a really good point that, matter of fact, I think it was a TED Talk, but she was talking about autism being that people say autism is on a spectrum, and that people on one side of the spectrum need less accommodation and people on the other side of the spectrum need more accommodation. And she said, that's really incorrect, that it's more of a color wheel, that some people are really they don't need any accommodation except for in this one area, and they have all the other areas covered, or they're mostly functional in these other areas. And she said it's more like a color wheel, where it's little bits and pieces of a whole that might be different for one person or another. And I thought, wow, that's a really great way to think about it. I mean, me as a person with ADHD, I have terrible project paralysis. I really need someone to body double with me to even, you can't see this room, but it's a mess. I mean, it is beyond a mess. It looks nice and neat in the video frame, but on the floor, it's chaos. And the whole weekend long, I was asking my wife, you know what, maybe you could come in the room with me and body double while I clean the room. That's an area where I need extra help. You put me on a project or a task or give me a challenge to solve a problem, boy, I am laser focused. So in one area, I'm excelling. In the other area, might as well be 3 years old, So I think in general, going back to our conversation about the idea of compartmentalizing content, which is really what we're talking about, is that if you can break your content into reliably consistent chunks, that if I know it's a heading and a couple of 3 list items, and a heading and a couple of 3 list items, or a heading and a list with 2 levels deep, and then another heading with a list 2 levels deep, that repeatable experience is really going to help me understand what's coming next, how much I have to digest, and how useful the information is for me in each of the different sections. So yeah, definitely good stuff.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Awesome. Well, the other thing we found out was that the tables in Google are tagged reasonably, but there's still going to be a little extra work to do, right, Chad?
So I also discovered that in a Google Doc on that table, when you hover over the left edge of the table, you'll see an icon also that looks like a little push pin, and that push pin also allows you to pin a row as a header, and you can actually move your cursor down as many rows as you want and pin multiple rows as header using that icon as well.
Right. And what we just want you all to be careful of is just remember, pinning the row is setting column headers, not row headers. So
Right.
if your table in Google Docs has row headers, let's say it's your whole first column is a row header for your table, it describes all the elements to the right. You don't have a way to actually assign those in Google Docs. Hey, Chad, I just thought of something. It reminds me of InDesign. So if you're used to InDesign, it's basically the same way as InDesign,
Yeah.
in that you cannot assign more than column headers inside InDesign. You can select as many rows as you want and say, hey, these are my column headers, but you can't select the first column or columns in a table and say, you're my row header. So that would require going into Acrobat and setting it. But hey, some accessibility is better than none. The structure in the table all comes out great. And that's actually pretty nice to see that it actually, it does create the table structure in a way that's correct.
We were talking about this earlier, Dax, how NVDA does assume column headers.
Right.
Like, so when you're reading a table, it kind of assumes that your table has column headers by default.
If no TH is marked, it will automatically set the first row as a column header set of THs. Yeah.
And I discovered that by accident when I was reading a document, because there was a table in there, and it was, the table technically only had row headers, no column headers at all.
Right.
And as you pointed out, I was not able to set row headers in the source.
Right.
When I was reading the table, it was voicing the first cell of every column,
right,
as I was reading the data. Right. So that was a case where I was like, why is it doing this? Why does it keep? And then I realized, I'm like, oh yeah, it's assuming that I have a column header.
Right. Well, and that's like with Adobe Read Aloud. When you have a figure that doesn't have alt text on it, but it has live text in the figure, it starts trying to read all of the live text. So if you have a bar chart and it's got all this text inside the bar chart and you didn't have alt text on it, Read Aloud starts reading every number just kind of in random sequence.
It does. And I think it even does it if you do have alt text. Like
in Read Aloud? Okay.
I think with Read Aloud, you can add alt text if you want to, but Read Aloud tries to read all the contents within that figure. Yeah. So very, very good, because that's a very common question we get. People are like, oh, I'm using Read Aloud, but it's reading all of the text elements within my figure. I'm like, yeah, that's what it does. Yeah. That's why Read Aloud's not a good tool for testing accessibility. For sure.
Well, speaking of images, we did find that in Google Docs, you do have the ability, of course, to set alt text on an image. You can right click and there is an alt text icon that you can go into. And it does allow you, it tells you access by screen readers for people who might have trouble seeing your content. And it gives you a little field you can add some alt text to. Then there is an advanced option that says add a title to your image. This will appear as a tooltip when published on the web. And it does actually use the title property. You and I looked at the publish on the web feature and looked at the HTML, and it's using the title field. But when you export to PDF, there is still a title field, but it doesn't write to it, which wouldn't matter if it did or didn't anyway, to be honest, because screen readers don't read the title field in a PDF, but interesting,
Yeah, the only value would be for the remediator, right? Like
Yeah.
that might be the only benefit, because as you pointed out, assistive technology doesn't read the title. It just kind of skips over it. But it was interesting that it was adding the title property for the web, but it didn't include it for a PDF. But
Yeah. Well, and speaking of tooltips, right? If you're in Word or PowerPoint and you create a link to something, one of the things that you need to make sure you do is set the tooltip for that link. So it's kind of like the alt text inside a hyperlink, right? And when you're in InDesign, you can set the alt text for your hyperlink or the content key, I guess. But in Word and PowerPoint, you need to go into the tooltip, which is in the upper right-hand corner. If you haven't looked for it, when you hit edit link, and it pops open the dialog box for Windows users, it's in the upper right-hand corner. It says screen tip. And that's the box you click on to open up and set the alt text.
yeah, I was trying to remember what I knew it said screen something, but I couldn't remember exactly what it was.
Yeah, screen tip. Yeah.
Yeah, screen tip. Yeah.
Which in fact is voiced by assistive technology when
Yeah.
you export to PDF. It gets written to the alt text field. So that is interesting. Well, Chad, since we're talking about alt text and what Google Docs can do, we should probably talk about just links in general in PDF. Now, we know with InDesign, InDesign will export a link with the content key entry. And that content key entry, as you pointed out, goes into the alternate description for links, which is that new field that's inside Acrobat, right? And then, but we know that JAWS and NVDA don't read this field. They only read the alternate text for images. So if you're testing your document with a screen reader, you're like, I don't understand why my alt text isn't coming out. That's likely because it was done in InDesign. Somebody may have done what they were supposed to do to add the alt text in the right place. But because NVDA and JAWS have a disconnect with what PDF UA and Adobe are doing, those values aren't getting read.
Right. And it's one of those frustrating things, right? Because the contents key for a link is required by PDF UA, right?
Right.
Which is why we do it, right? So we're basically just kind of following the standard. We all want the green check marks when we run our report. And so we do it, right? We click the button, we run it through pre-flight in Acrobat, whatever method you use. But at the end of the day, it doesn't really mean anything to the user, right? It's right. One of these things. And we did a podcast recently about, how screen readers lie to you, right?
Yep.
And this isn't really about how screen readers lie to you, but the standard is saying you've got to have this element, but the screen reader isn't going to read it.
Well, it's these two islands, right? You've got one island, which is the people making the rules, and the other island, which is the people listening to the content. They're creating the readers. And if both of these entities aren't in line with each other, then the people who are making up the rules are going to keep making up new rules. NVDA and JAWS are going to be like, yeah, we're not interested in that. We don't really care or understand why that's a thing, or it's on our backlog of things to fix. And the only people that suffer are the people who use the software.
Is the user. Yeah.
Well, and us as remediators, because we're the ones who are like told you must pass a checker.
Yeah.
I look at that and say, okay, that's a good benefit, but I definitely want to make sure that my document sounds right to a person using assistive technology. So, definitely two things at odds.
And let's just take a step back and talk about like why this requirement came to be in the first place, right? So like, why would they say hyperlinks need to have alt text? What's the value? Well, it came from a time, if everybody recalls, if everybody's old enough, Dax, right? Old as us, you remember when every hyperlink on a web page said click here, right? It would say click here, and the problem with that is that the user didn't really know where they were going, right? They knew that they were given an action to perform. They're told to click here, but they didn't know where they were going. And so from an accessibility standpoint, they said, listen, for these hyperlinks, we need you to describe where the link is taking the user, where they're going to go. And that was the point of it. Unfortunately, the value of it is minimal because the screen readers are not voicing that information. So it's something we all need to just pay attention to.
For sure. Definitely so. Well, guys, I hope that you have found some useful information here today. It's really great that Google is starting to make things more accessible. We hope that Canva follows suit. We're really hopeful that they eventually will get their developers to really buy into programmatic accessibility, so that the actual code is accessible and not just kind of the surface level stuff. We are partners with a company that has a product out there, right? Chad, Grackle, they have a product out there that will help you take your Google Docs even further for accessibility. If you really want to be able to do things like row headers and footnotes and all the other things that you'd like to be able to get out of your PDF from a Google environment, that's a great product to know, right?
And that product is called Grackle Docs, right? So if anybody's interested, it is it's a plug-in for Google Docs, and I can't remember the price point off the top of my head, but if I recall, it's not like crazy expensive, right? But there is a cost involved because there's development efforts behind it. But yeah, that's the tool that a lot of people are using to get their Google Docs compliant in the PDF format. So
yeah,
very
cool
very
beans.
much very worth checking out, right? Because it's literally, prior to Google taking a step in trying to make their content tagged, it was the only way to make it happen. I am curious though, like if this addition, I don't know if Grackle Docs,
I wasn't gonna say it. I was like,
but it makes me curious. I mean, does that affect what Grackle Docs is doing, or are they still
I don't think
kind
so.
of in control? Yeah, I would assume.
Yeah. 1 + 1 is 2. Regardless of 1 + 1 is 2, regardless of who says it, whether Google Docs does it or Grackle Docs does it on the way out, it's still accessible. So
absolutely. Well, everybody, I want to thank everybody for tuning in today. I hope you found it useful. Hope you learned some things. I know Dax and I always like talking about, different accessibility properties and features. So we hope you enjoyed it too. My name is Chad Chilius.
And my name is Dax Castro, where every other week we unravel accessibility for you.
Thanks, guys.